Coming up next, we have a very, very special guest, Congressman Steve King. I was first introduced to Congressman King at a Phyllis Schlafly's Eagles event, and he was introduced as Phyllis Schlafly's favorite congressman. He used to represent a district in Iowa. He really is a hero of the freedom movement, and he's going to come up and talk to us about land rights and a major, major threat that's unfortunately not even on the radar of most people yet, and that is these CO2 pipelines and the carbon capture scam. Congressman King, come on up. Thank you so much.
Well, boy, it's worth for coming out here just to hear the first two speakers ahead of me this morning. And I intend to pay attention to a lot of the rest that's coming out here today. I'll just maybe give you a little quick background of myself so you get a sense of how I have a privilege of having a look at this scheme that goes back to global. And some background is I formed a construction company in 1975, and we ended up doing a lot of different things. And in the course of all of that, and actually prior to my time forming that company, I built pipelines, I've drilled for oil, I've greased the top sheave on the ice and the derrick, and done a lot of the work as far as laying pipe and underground work. And then I found myself frustrated with what government wasn't doing, and I ran for the Iowa Senate in 1996, spent 6 years there, and then ran for Congress in 2002, spent 18 years there. Through the course of all of that, it brought about a lot of travel that I didn't expect I'd be doing. It's taken me to over 70 countries in the world, and many times, not probably quite half of the time, dealing with their top people that are there. Say, for example, Angela Merkel in Germany would be one of those that I debated this Green New Deal with before they had the name for it. And at the end of that debate, she was frustrated, and she said, "Well, I am a physicist, and you will not defeat me." So tells you something about the German sense of humor, I guess. But, you know, I'm about half that. So, but that's across through that spectrum. I saw what was being shaped across Europe. I'm over there debating with the people as the ideas of this global warming took shape when they changed the name of it from global warming to climate change. I watched them sell it across Europe to the European Union, and I saw it penetrated into the minds of the people in the legislatures, the Bundestag in particular, and The Hague in the Netherlands as well. So I saw this forming. That was simultaneous with arriving in the United States Congress and hearing Ed Markey on the floor of the U.S. House at that time arguing cap and trade, which is kind of the father of this carbon credit business that we have now and the carbon penalty that they have in other countries like Canada, for example. And so I saw this thing shaped together, and I had a perspective that came from a science background in college and a construction background, a political background, and spread across international places where I could see this coming together. I have never laid eyes on Klaus Schwab, but you know, I have a decent understanding of his history. So I want to take you back to that, and maybe if I can go fast enough, I can bring this down to where this matters and bring us down to Jared Bosley, because this is a great big scheme that was a brainchild and clear back, I'll say, more than 20 years ago from the beginning. And I saw them shape this carbon credit piece in CO2. Starting about 15 years ago, I did a deep dive into it about a year ago, and I spent 3 weeks in my office just drilling down, and I could find the sources as far back as probably now 16 years ago when the World Economic Forum was laying this foundation to get them where they are today. So I'm describing this because I want you to understand how big this monster is, what this beast is doing, and how this beast has brought down the tentacles of the octopus reaching into the facets of our life, like Jared Bosley's life and the life of so many people that I represented in the United States Congress. And I represent today as the founder of the Free Soil Foundation, and that's an organization that's a 501c3 that we formed to fight this, to network the states that you've heard Jared mention, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, and over into Illinois to the extent that we can. So that's a piece of the background. I'm also in Congress. I served as the chair of the Conservative Opportunity Society. It was formed by Newt Gingrich. I spent 16 years hosting a breakfast off the record, closed doors, 8 o'clock every Wednesday morning. And so there I could bring in keynote speakers and high-profile speakers and push their ideas out into the Congress without having the press and all the critics attacking them. That was an effective piece. I also was the chairman of the Constitution Committee in the United States House of Representatives, and I carry a Constitution in my pocket every day. I've got a jacket on. It's kind of worn out now, but it has been, it's not a labor, it's a love of my life of this Constitution, and I think Sheriff Mack described that so clearly that I don't need to add to that piece. But they put these pieces in place, and this scheme is set up to empower, to consolidate power, to consolidate businesses, to vertically integrate industry after industry, institution after institution, because it's hard to manage a free people. You have to take their freedom away. And so think of Klaus Schwab sitting there actually in Geneva, and then they put on their dog and pony show at Davos while there's stuff going on behind the curtain there at the same time, sitting there like the Wizard of Oz. And he's got his people around him that are the board members of the World Economic Forum, people like Larry Fink, for example, who sits there elbow to elbow with Klaus Schwab. These are the masters of the universe on the board of the World Economic Forum. They believe they are. And they're on a path that is so chilling to me. They want to starve the population. They think that the roughly 8 billion people that we have on this planet now are too many. And if you can get down under 500 million, it may not be too many. That's their number. I'm not making that up. And then, of course, that means you've got to starve people to death. You've got to shut down the control of the food production. A good example of that would be how they're shutting off fertilizer use in the Netherlands, and all those tractors came into Amsterdam and jammed the place. We've seen that in other countries over there, too. The move is on us. And so another piece of it, so I'll just say, we have the octopus here, and there's a central brain. This is not an organic movement. There's a central brain that's strategizing this, and they believe that they can manipulate all of us. And part of it was COVID, and part of it's the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization, by the way, now is poised to, sometime in May, to almost automatically take away America's sovereignty. And there's a press conference that I'd like to have been at this morning to lay this out in Washington, but I'm here instead, and those folks will carry on just fine without me. But I want you to pay attention to the the World Health Organization and what they're doing to control. They'll be able to declare, if we don't get this turned around quickly, they'll be able to declare a pandemic globally and give orders on what we have to do in this country. And the Senate is sitting there now still kind of twiddling their thumbs that if this is a treaty that's set up kind of automatically, and the Senate has to ratify treaties, that's constitutional, and they're not defending their constitutional authority at this point. And so I'll just ask you to take a look at that and turn myself back down to CO2. But I want you to know that this is cooked up at the World Economic Forum. And then they sold it all across Europe. And they sold it to Democrats, especially in the United States. Ed Markey, I mentioned one. It's AOC's Green New Deal that's on us now. And a good number of moderate Republicans have decided they don't want to fight this. I'm not sure what they believe. But when I walked into Congress in 2002, when they did the orientation indoctrination, they said to me and the rest of us, do not debate the science of global warming. You will lose. But you can debate the finances because Republicans are better with money than Democrats are. And I thought, what if I'm right? Why would I not debate something that threatens our society if I'm right? And so I continually debated it, and still do, of course, and they continue to cut and run from the issue. But we must stand up to this. It is a climate hoax. The foundation of the science is not upheld, not in my view, and I won't go that way because I'll run out of time. But what happened then was the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, and people out there like Bill Gates and John Kerry, and of course George Soros. George Soros is a ringleader of this, and his fingers go into, actually, none of us in this room are unaffected by the hand of George Soros in one way or another. I mean, he is the evil empire's god, and when he pushes money out across this country and across into all these institutions, and then the Democrats will do what George Soros says. If they just flips his toggle switch, it happens. And so I saw this happen, and here we are now in this modern era. When Joe Biden was elected president, they had the majorities in the House, the Senate, and of course the presidency. And when AOC pushed her Green New Deal, which not her idea at all, she's just carrying it, they tried to pass that in the form of the Build Back Better plan, if you remember. And Joe Manchin killed that, ironically, because he wanted his pipeline in West Virginia. So they cut another deal, gave him his pipeline in West Virginia, stuffed the Green New Deal language into the Inflation Reduction Act. The biggest misnomer I can think of among many of them that Congress does. It didn't reduce any inflation, but it hid this Green New Deal. And in that, when Biden signed that, were hundreds of billions of dollars of appropriations for carbon credits. Carbon credits where if you can take a metric ton of CO2 out of the atmosphere or out of an exhaust stack, a bio release of an ethanol plant, and sequester it somewhere where you can promise it's going to stay there for 12 years, then you get $85 for that metric ton. So here we are in Iowa. We have about close to half the ethanol production in the upper Midwest, I suppose, is in Iowa. And I've been involved with that industry clear back to 1978. And we put people together on boards to form and build ethanol plants strategically located for logistic reasons and production reasons. And that industry, I won't go further into that except to tell you I'm very familiar with the ethanol industry too. And so when the carbon credits went up and Biden signed that bill for the carbon credits, that was the equivalent of launching the Oklahoma land rush back in a century or so ago when they fired the shot at noon and everybody took off across the countryside to drive their stakes in the ground. But these guys, they were waiting in that line all right, and they had moved the pieces around on the chessboard before that ever happened, and they were set to go. Well, so what came at us was Larry Fink, board member of World Economic Forum, the CEO of BlackRock, controlling now over $10 trillion in investments. He sets up an operation with Navigator to build pipelines to connect about half the ethanol plants into this Navigator operation that he proposed. And it set up, would start collecting some of the plants in South Dakota, northeast Nebraska, Iowa, southwest Minnesota, on down to southern Illinois in the oil fields, near the oil fields, they always say, near the oil fields. And his pipeline would gather a scattering of ethanol plants. Now Bruce Rastetter, who is, by the way, the Republican George Soros of the upper Midwest, and he is a globalist. Bruce Rastetter, write his name down. You need to know who that man is, and I know him very well for being inside his inner sanctum and being opposed by his inner sanctum and his team. But so Bruce Rastetter's operation is called Summit, and his actually starts in eastern Iowa over near the Mississippi River, and it runs not southeast like the Navigator plan of Larry Fink's, but instead it runs to the northwest to collect from Iowa, Nebraska, southwest Minnesota, South Dakota, terminating in North Dakota up, not in, but near the oil fields. Now, these pipelines, 3,300 miles of pipeline between these two companies proposed, 3,300 miles, and they go in opposite directions. One runs like this, the other one runs like that. And they cross, by the original plan, at least 15 times that I can count off the map. And you don't have to be a genius or a rocket surgeon to figure out that that's not a very good business model to go through all that private land, build all these pipelines, have them run in parallel, opposite direction to each other and crossing each other 15 times. Couldn't these guys cut a deal? And they did cut a deal, in my opinion. And that is, Navigator finally pulled out. Bruce Rastetter, the demon George Soros of the upper Midwest on the Republican side, he adopted almost all of those ethanol plants. In fact, perhaps all of those ethanol plants. Some came from Poet, the largest ethanol producer in the country. They have 34 plants. 17 of them went into this. And Valero put their plants in that. By the way, I'm also mentioning people that were the #1 donors to the second inauguration of South Dakota's governor, which I'm sure Jared knows that. And so that gives you a sense of what this is. But we set up, so in Iowa, we had hearings that went on from August 22nd until mid-November, and I attended not quite half of them, and some of the others I watched online, and it's a grueling thing to see that the law is set up so that you can't litigate your property rights until you actually have standing. You're not going to have standing unless the Utilities Board offers a permit or grants a permit to the pipeline company. And if they do that, and I expect that's what they are appointed for, then immediately that pipeline company is automatically granted eminent domain authority to bulldoze their way through the best farmland in the world that's owned by families that are 5 and 7 generations of them, and there's not a one of them they haven't sweat into that soil and bled into that soil, as you heard Jared say, his mother. I knew that they could not build these pipelines without eminent domain because I know these landowners. I've represented them for years. I've been to, I don't know what I'd add it to be, the 950 towns in Iowa. I imagine I've probably been to 700 of them. And I've can certify most all of that, actually. So, I mean, I know these people. And this land is not just a piece of dirt that has a money value to it. It has a heritage, and it has a future for the succeeding generations. They had to know this, too. Bruce Rastetter had to know this. They have to know that they are planning on trampling over our constitutional rights, and the way the stage was set in Iowa was they can drag out these hearings and grind this out. It's a 3-person. South Dakota is an elected PUC, and North Dakota has a similar situation. Ours in Iowa, they're appointed. All 3 of them on the board have been appointed by Governor Reynolds. 2 of them were appointed in April of last year, right before the Senate adjourned. And the Senate did confirm them, but if they hadn't been confirmed, they would have been known as interim appointments, and they could have served as if they had been confirmed. The timing was, and one of them, the chairman of the Utilities Board, his name is Eric Helland. Eric Helland he had to leave Iowa for some reason, and I won't go into the rumors of that, but he went up to Alaska and formed a company. That company is still operating. It's still got a website, and its name, 49th was the 49th state of Alaska. The name of the company, the chairman of the Iowa Utilities Board that formed was 49th Summit Solutions. And we're dealing with an application from Summit Carbon Solutions to take over this property across Iowa and hundreds of miles of land. And he sits there with a straight face as if there's no implication. I don't have the legal connection, but it's surely not a coincidence. And so we feel the power of politics coming at us. And the point I think I need to make most is this, that Larry Fink and Navigator, when they set their pipeline up to go from the northwest to the southeast, and that was the blue flag of the leftists, the Democrats, and then Bruce Rastetter's is the red flag of the Republicans. Larry Fink had to know that if he was going to try to monopolize this or build this pipeline across the area that he had, he wasn't going to get that done because each of these, well, I'll say North and South Dakota, Nebraska, and Iowa all have or had, I'll say have, red state governors that are populist governors that at least posed as property rights defenders. Now, if a Democrat that emanates from George Soros starts to take over the farmland, politically they can't sustain themselves. So they would have stood up, all of them, the governors or legislative leaders would have stood up and taken on Larry Fink and Navigators because of the source and the origin of it, maybe not because of conviction on ideology. So that's why Bruce Rastetter entered in, and he had to go first. And so I'll say this, that if you look at the campaign donations, you can follow the money. That's part of it. There's a good old boy network that goes with that. There's a support team that's part of that. There's other reasons in addition to the money, but the money is a good thing to follow. If you follow the money, and by the way, every face that Jared Brosley put up on his screens over here, I know all those people. And in the course of what I've done for life, I've got a pretty good feel for the Dakotas and Nebraska especially. But the governors, I said this in Bismarck, and I'm going to qualify myself a little bit because there's a bill still sitting in the Iowa Senate right now. But generally speaking, the governors of North and South Dakota, Nebraska, and Iowa, and I can't speak with the clear knowledge so much about Minnesota and Illinois, but they are the governors, the legislative leadership, essentially are fully owned subsidiaries of Bruce Rastetter and Summit. That's how bad it is. And I served in the Iowa Senate, and I still know a lot of those people and deal with them. They do not have they don't have the courage to step up and come out and defeat this. This is the 3rd year in a row we've had legislation, and each time it goes over to the Iowa Senate, each time they say, we don't have the votes. In fact, I got a text on my way here this morning that said, your bill is not looking so good, we don't have the votes. Well, I know who those people are, and I know the votes we don't have, and I know who they associate with. And the chairs of a relevant committee, especially the Commerce Committee, in killing this bill. And the person that killed it last year was the vice chair. His name's Mike Brusilo. And Mike Brusilo is a former employee of Summit and a former chief of staff of Governor Terry Branstad. So you can just go on and on with these connections. The politics are so heavy in this, and even though we're right, it's at least a 78% issue defending our constitutional property rights. In Iowa, in South Dakota, it's at least 85% issue opposing this eminent domain. We can't assert our rights and can't even litigate them on constitutional foundation in Iowa until they issue a permit. And then at that time, it'll be too late because the bulldozers will be sitting there ready to go, and the excavators. And there won't be any of mine, by the way. So that's a little bit of my rant. I want to tell you a little bit about Kilo 2. And that is, you heard that mentioned from Greg Price, the video. I was in Congress when that came down in 2006. And it was outrageous. And so I went to the Majority Leader Tom DeLay and said, we can't let this stand. And he said, well, we can't overrule the Supreme Court. Well, we all know that. I said, no, but we can beat up on them. So we wrote a resolution of disapproval of the Kilo decision and stood on the floor and pounded them for, I'd say, a couple of hours and pushed it all into the congressional record. That's always burned in my soul on what they did to Suzette Kilo and others on that decision that took her property rights, bulldozed her house for the benefit of another private entity. This is what can't happen. The Constitution says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. This pipeline isn't even public use. It's a private company that owns the CO2 that's in that pipeline, and they won't. There's such a private company that one of the landowners said, "You want to pay me for an easement? I want to take it back in shares of your company. Sorry, you can't invest in our company. It's just we good old boys doing this." And so they want to have a private company, and they want to take our private land for their private profit, and 100% of the income is going to come out of all of you and your taxes. There's no value to this commodity and what they propose to do with it, but if I had another 30 minutes, I explain to you the rest of the plan. That's all this. It is crooked, it stinks, it's corrupt. And by the way, we took this into the presidential race too. I could not crack into Donald Trump's inner sanctum on this at all. They shielded him from this. And 2 days before the Iowa caucus, then you had Bruce Rastetter came out and endorsed Donald Trump. And the day after that, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum endorsed Donald Trump. And so that tells you what's going on here. It's wired in really tight. And I'm going to just conclude with this. I want you to think about something that I came across that was, I think it has a really good relevancy on what we're doing here. And this comes from William Pitt, Earl of Chatham. So he lived 1708 to 1778. He was the British Whig statesman and prime minister from 1766 till 68. This is before our declaration, before our Constitution. William Pitt, Earl of Chatham, he said this. He said, "The poorest man may, in his cottage, bid defiance to all the forces of the crown. It may be frail, its roof may shake, the wind may blow through it, the storm may enter, the rain may enter, but the King of England cannot enter. All his force dares not cross the threshold of the ruined tenement." That's where we need to be with our property rights in this country. Free enterprise is dead if we can't protect right to property. And we got to protect Jared Bosley and everybody that he represents. God bless you all. Thank you.